Welcome to the final panel of the day before the closing session. So we have today the topic is Finland's contribution in Africa, the current picture and future possibilities for policy and education sector collaboration. We'll have this discussion in English because it will also be streamed abroad. My name is Niina Tenhio. I come from one of the organizing parties of this conference, from Fingo, which is the Finnish Development NGO's national platform. We have around 300 member organizations that are NGOs doing different types of development work, also in education sector all around the world. And it's my pleasure today to moderate this discussion where we have three excellent experts. We have Mr. Jussi Karakoski, an advisor from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, who is especially responsible for the Africa and Middle East region, and also the previous education sector advisor from the ministry, so a very strong experience there. And then we have Ms. Elina Lehtomäki, who is from University of Oulu, and the professor of global education, I believe. And then we have Ms. Iina Soiri, who is the Team Finland Knowledge Counselor, and also actually based in the embassy of in Pretoria. So, and I understood you will draw on examples from South African Republic, Namibia, and Mozambique. So, welcome for the discussion, and I will first give the floor to Jussi Karakoski. So, if you could briefly introduce a little bit of yourself, in apart from what I said already, and then draw your conclusions on the topic of today. So, what is the key point of where we are at the moment? What is the current picture of Africa and the future possibilities for policy and education sector collaboration, especially? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Niina. As she said, I'm working as an advisor in the Africa and Middle East department of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and our department is responsible for political relations, trade-related issues, and development cooperation in Africa and the Middle East. So that's my perspective, although I'll be focusing on the development cooperation aspect to some extent, but putting things into the broader context of the government's Africa strategy and then our comprehensive country strategies in our partner countries. So if I continue right away, I started the previous session with a story about President Kekkonen climbing a palm tree in Tunisia in '65. Now I promise to focus on this year and next year alone, so you don't have to hear the story twice. Starting from the present government's program in June, the new government launched its program and very clearly stated that the focus of development cooperation is in Africa. And as a practical consequence of that decision, a government's Africa strategy will be prepared starting early next year. And there's a very clear willingness to increase economic and political cooperation with Africa, and it's already reflected in high-level visits to and from Africa, including most notably President Niinistö's recent visit to Ethiopia and ministerial visits planned for next year, which is something very positive because if we want to raise the level of political relations, we definitely need the politicians to meet their counterparts in Africa. Whereas at the moment, Finland's relations with Africa are relatively scattered and pretty much dependent on public funding. For instance, exports comprise only 2.6% of Finland's total exports, and in Africa focus in only 4 countries, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, and South Africa. This is the situation, but there's already a change in the our embassies in 12 countries. They report that there are somewhere around 200 Finnish companies active in Africa in some countries like Kenya, already 100 or so companies active there. Another positive example is Finland with the 500 million portfolio of investments. 67% of those investments are focused in Africa. So the Finnish relations with Africa are increasing, and they are becoming mainstream gradually. The prime reason for a national Africa strategy will be to make Finnish activities on the continent more coherent. It will not be a strategy on how Africa should develop, because African countries and Africans can decide for themselves. It will be, and hopefully I would add, a participatory process to first to increase knowledge of what happens in Africa today in Finland. Also to increase knowledge of different actors of one another, which is very much the focus of this seminar as well. And to increase communication, sharing, co-creation, collaboration. Indeed, multi-partner cooperation, which is the specific focus of yesterday's and today's seminar. Then how does education fit in this broader picture? First, our country strategies in education. In our country's strategies, education is already among the biggest sectors, and it's on the increase. In addition, there are different funding instruments mentioned several times here, like higher education institutions, projects, NGO cooperation, and so on and so forth, supported by the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. So, in short, development cooperation in education has a lot of potential to increase and also to expand to other countries, new subsectors. We just discussed technical and vocational education, where we have interest to expand in Ethiopia, Tanzania, perhaps Kenya. So that's one. Secondly, the Africa strategy and also new comprehensive country strategies, which are planned next year for our long-term partner countries. They will offer a platform for all cooperation and not just development cooperation. So we'll jointly set Finland's broader objectives on the continent and in partner countries to hopefully guide all actors and make work, be it trade, development cooperation or political relations, policies and funding more coherent. And a footnote perhaps for civil society organizations and higher education institutions present, of course, respecting the autonomy of various organizations, so not guiding in that way, telling what to do, but to provide a more coherent set of Finnish objectives. Thirdly, Finnish know-how should be better mobilized to support tackling the big issues and challenges on the continent. And hopefully these Finnish national strategies will guide the Finnish actors in that. And on this occasion, I only mentioned the technological and digital leap which is needed for the African countries to benefit from globalization, because cheap labor will be less and less an asset for most countries. So closing the skills gaps is definitely very much needed, and this covers basic skills, but also soft skills, technological skills, digital skills, higher education, and research. And now I think I'll let my colleagues who are more capable to speak about research, for instance, to continue.
Yes, thank you, Jussi. So you also mentioned you were talking about the Africa strategy, but there's also the new government program which mentions very strongly the Africa strategy. And one of the key focuses of the Finnish government program is the collaboration across sectors. And this is also one of the key factors on the Africa strategy, that it is supposed to be not only focusing on development, but different sectors. So yes, Miss Elina Lehtomäki, or Professor Elina Lehtomäki, if you could say a few words from your perspective about the current Finnish contribution in Africa, and also how the education sector collaboration looks like from your perspective.
Yes, I think when we come to the education sector, one of the sort of promoters, as we often say, is higher education and teacher education, but also leadership. And what we have discussed in this report on how to increase Finland's global role in education, essentially we want to look at the whole education system, not only one dimension or one aspect in education system development. So that is what is required from our partners also, to look at more holistically what is education. Finland's collaboration has been based on short-term projects, which I've often critiqued maybe during the last 30 years for short-term perspectives, while we do expect and we are requested to have long-term commitments. So that is something I think I would always like to point out to the ministry side, that we need to have a longer-term perspective when it comes to education systemic development in order to take into consideration all these different levels of education, starting from early childhood education in sub-Saharan Africa, in the African Union education strategy. And I think it is the African Union education strategy that we also need to look at it, because that has been compiled together by African governments and leaders in education. And they have focused on issues such as early childhood education, quality of education, but also they do mention leadership. And these are dimensions where we have been acting or enacting, I think, rather weakly, even though we do have potential to do more. And so these priorities that are defined by governments in the region are very important, I think. And I think when it comes to different countries within sub-Saharan Africa, I would focus on sub-Saharan Africa because that is the smallest higher education sector globally. If you look at globally, you know that in Finland we aim to have 50% of the age cohorts who complete their secondary level education. We would like them to have completed higher education. We do know that sub-Saharan Africa has the smallest rate of higher education completion rates, but also higher education sector is the smallest if you look at globally. Even Southeast Asia, which also lags behind when it comes to education learning achievements, they do lag behind, but they have a bigger higher education sector. So that means essentially they have better resources to respond to the learning crises than sub-Saharan Africa. And that is why what I would like to emphasize also, that we have higher education cooperation instruments. We do have already some 20 years of experience when it comes to higher education cooperation. While at the same time, I think we have ignored a bit the lack of resources to coordinate and collaborate. And our African partners, what they have emphasized is that they want to know how to develop education, how research contributes. And the difficulty I see in research field is that often research in our partner countries, research is often commissioned. So what needs to be studied is not initiated by our partners or our scholars in the partner countries. Another aspect that I would like to highlight is the alumni. We do have a number of people who have been trained with master's degrees, even doctoral degrees in Finland, and we have not yet used them in our education sector development cooperation sufficiently enough. And I would like to highlight, we had, for instance, one of our alumni on our first day, Dr. Abebe Jeholaborg-Malle, who was talking about inclusive TVET. And I think these are the people we should sort of reach and support their expertise in their fields, and also try to combine them so that combine our knowledge with their knowledge, and then their contextualized understanding of the challenges over there. And I think if you look at education from the funding perspective, I'm happy to hear that there will be increased funding. And I do hope that some of that funding really is geared also to research cooperation and initiatives, that come from the ideas of our alumni, their colleagues, their university contexts. And in order to strengthen the value of teachers, our colleague from the Faculty of Law in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, he was talking at our UNIPID conference last week during the Educational Research Days, and he said teachers are not valued in our society. And he was thinking about how could we collaborate across different sectors, like you said. The legislative framework is there, ensuring good quality education for all, but teachers don't know about it. Teacher educators don't know about it. Our partners in our multi-stakeholder collaboration may not know about it. So there's a lot of room for this kind of conferences, not only in Finland, but also in our partner countries, where we do invite multi-stakeholder cooperators to come together and discuss what can be done in education. And I think that comes to also the research. What are the findings? How do we disseminate? How do we share them so that also the teachers on the ground can reach that? And that is one way of increasing the value of the teaching profession in our partner countries. So right. I'll stop here because I'm sure that Iina has more to say also about the country level cooperation.
Yes, thank you very much, Elina. So also what is new in the new Finnish government program is that there's an emphasis on quality of education. And Elina mentioned also the coordination and collaboration, which hasn't been resourced properly so far. So how does this situation look from the perspective of Pretoria? Please, Iina, go ahead.
Thanks. Let me first talk about the perspective I see now, because I think it's a metaphor for how many African countries feel they are positions in the world. You feel like you're falling over me, and that I'm at the bottom of everything. And I think that's what often, I'm sure, African representatives and even African high schools, universities or higher educations feel. And I think to make me more comfortable now, we should turn this sort of perspective upside down, because that's how it is often perceived. And I would like to ask you all that, do you know, or did you know, that the University of Cape Town has 5 Nobel Prizes? How many do we have here in Finland?
Oh, in Oulu we have 1.
Good, and in Aalto 1. Okay, 5 for one university in South Africa. So you start from there, and then you can also start asking, so this question what we have here, so how can Finland contribute to African development? I think we could again turn this question around. What can we learn? What can we get or benefit from collaboration with African universities or higher education? And I think that has been my job for the past 6-7 years when I was leading the Nordic Africa Institute, where we did a lot of this work in Nordic countries to try to understand that the global landscape has permanently changed. We are no more in the same world we used to be. And whenever we are doing something, whether it's an Africa strategy or some kind of policy on what we're going to do with Africa, I think we have to remember that. It's not anymore automatic that we walk to the continent and I said, look, what can we do for you? I think it's often we should ask, so what can we do together? And for some time I was already sort of launching this idea that the future cooperation with Global South in general, but of course now we're talking Africa, which I know the best of those Global South regions, is knowledge co-creation. We have huge troubles at the moment in many South African universities of challenging the way the knowledge is being produced and the way knowledge is being perceived in the global landscape. And I think it comes, of course, from the fact that the way we have employed the resources of this globe to our benefit, mostly to northern benefit, has actually made us to hit the wall. So apart from having 5 Nobel Prizes, another university of South Africa, Stellenbosch, has the best climate research institute in the world. that's also something for you to consider. So I think it's about time that we in Finland, that we understand that this is all about cooperation, it's all about co-creation, it's all about understanding that we are not going to solve the problems what we are facing without, being open and being sort of more, open or sort of humble when we're looking for partners, and understand also that perhaps this sort of the most common way of international collaboration in higher education sector is with America or European countries. Many other European countries are already there. I'm talking about South Africa, Namibia, Mozambique. I'm kind of rephrasing what I was supposed to say here, but I can tell you more about those countries. But so many other countries have long time discovered that this is where the future research is being done. University of Pretoria has set up a whole campus for future technologies. They call it Future Africa Campus, and they're doing groundbreaking research on certain plants and climate, and what are those issues that are facing us. We also know, we've been discussing a lot here during these 2 days, that we have a huge potential in the young people, and the problem is, of course, both here and there, that we don't even know what they should learn, because we don't know how the world will look like within 20, 30 years. I think that's most important for us to remember when we think about education collaboration, be it TWET or early childhood education. We better be humble and listen how those people who will be, or those countries that will be the megacities, or that will hold the megacities, that will have the biggest population in the world, how do they perceive what the future societies would look like? So like I said, I just forget what I was supposed to say, because this place makes me feel very anxious. But I think that's the way the world looks like from Africa, because they're not taking serious. And I think Finland, having had a very good collaboration, having been there on the right side of the struggle for independence and the struggle for democracy in Southern Africa, I think we can now be on the right side of understanding that we are the ones who will benefit if we are able and willing to share what we have because of our knowledge and our financial resources. And I'm not calling for development cooperation. I'm calling for partnership that is based on more equal level. Thanks.
Thank you, Ina. We also have new opportunities for partnerships, because just today was actually the official nomination of the new Commission, of the European Commission, and also Jutta Urpilainen has now been officially nominated as the Commissioner for Partnerships and International Partnerships, and we are all expecting that Africa will very much be in the focus of her portfolio. I would like to bring the discussion a little bit more to future, because that's the other side of the question. So we have a few minutes, so if you could state one positive example where you see a lot of potential for this kind of Finnish collaboration. If you can think about a specific country, what would that be? Could you, Jussi, start? Or if somebody has already a country in mind, then we can also go the opposite order.
Namibia is Finnish best friend, definitely. And I know we are there already. There is no other country in that continent that knows us so well. And okay, we can say Namibia is a small country, 2.3 million inhabitants, but we have 5.5, so not a big deal. And Namibia is one of the leading countries in the continent, so I think it open up quite many possibilities for us. But yeah. Then of course we have to take into account the big populated countries, South Africa, of course, being in the front when it comes to university collaboration and research production. By the way, in South Africa, they have within 15 years they've more than doubled their share of world scientific production without raising actually their GDP for research that much. So there is a huge efficiency leap that has happened. I also consider it's very important that we do rely on our good relations which we've created with development cooperation. It doesn't mean that we should continue development cooperation, but we do have a presence in those countries where we have had several different projects and collaborations. I mean, Ethiopia, for example, which is one of the leading countries. We should never forget Ethiopia when we think about our collaboration. It's the Brussels of Africa, of course, with Addis being the host of African Union. And what Elina said, I think also looking at the dynamics in the continent, the African Union, the regional economic entities or communities, they're very important. We should better read how Africa organizes itself and then look where we can have a strategic collaboration. Because, I mean, for example, the African Free Trade Area has already come to force. What are we going to do about it? Because that also opens opportunities in many respects. So look at the partners, build on what we already have. We are a small, very small actor in the continent, but we have our niche. And so build on what we have and then look at the dynamics and talk to other Nordic countries. Sorry, I'm always with Nordic Africa Institute, but I mean, we can also sort of pool our resources because we are known as this part of the world where they have created the best way of living. So let us not forget that we can also sort of bank on that.
Yeah, one of the advantages of Nordic countries is also the lack of colonial past in comparison to many other European countries. But please, Elina, your...
Which is not true.
Which is not true.
Great. Thank you for educating also me.
We are discussing the colonial past, especially with the Sami population up in the north. So we should not forget that, and we have to decolonize our approaches as well, and be very careful because colonial approaches can be easily there if we impose the agenda, and that is what essentially Ina was also saying, that there's a lot of potential there, there's a lot of sort of knowledge base also that we should build on. And I think one issue that I support Ina's comment is the South-South cooperation. When you look at the higher education sector in sub-Saharan Africa, you can see these hubs being developed at the moment. So universities do partner. They do emphasize South-South partnership. And that was also emphasized by the new exchange and mobility scheme, where European Commission or European Union had this mobility scheme where universities in sub-Saharan Africa were looking for partners within the continent, but then they always needed one European partner. And I think here in Finland, we did not have enough such partnerships that were they needed a coordinating entity, one of the universities here in European Union area to coordinate activities that would enable South-South cooperation between the universities. And essentially we do see that it is very important to have this kind of sort of hub type of activities. But then that also fits, I think, very well in our multi-stakeholder cooperation. And that is, I think, essentially this co-creation at its best. That when we have this view that Ina mentioned, that you are looking down, and if we represent Africa here now, Jussi, Ina and me, then I think we do feel that things are often imposed. Requests and demands are imposed. And I think if you take that perspective, then I think the South-South cooperation essentially sort of breaks that sort of dilemma, that if you have one partner in the north or in Europe, and then we would have two partners there. But then again, the capacity to coordinate is still very low. As I said, the smallest higher education sector in the whole world in sub-Saharan Africa, even though we have the 5 Nobelists in Cape Town and things like that. But I think what we need to do is to map the resources again and see who are there and who are working there and where. But I also would like to look at our long-term partners. We do have education sector cooperation in Ethiopia. We have it in Mozambique. We used to have it in Namibia, but we used to have also Tanzania on our agenda, Zambia, Uganda in education cooperation, and the needs are there. And we don't cooperate in the education sector with these countries at the moment. So I would like to also remind the embassies in those countries that I understand that priorities have to be set by the embassies. When we have scholars in those countries who would like to continue the cooperation, we have to find a way to do that. And this South-South cooperation provides one way of doing that. But then maybe some kind of coordination power is needed. And it's not because there would not be capacity, but just that the resources are so limited and stretched in many countries, in many of our partner countries. And I think this kind of coordination capacity can be increased also by engaging our alumni who've been studying with us and who know us and who can be the cultural mediators in between. And I think that is where the embassies could support us and, of course, the Team Knowledge Finland. So I think this is essential to have like somebody like Ina there, that we have a contact point and we can ask for advice. How do we build this sort of coordination capacity further? And so these would be, I think, the important issues. Also, our international organizations do have regional hubs and organizations and offices there. So I think these are essential. We work in partnership.
Thank you, Elina. And now, Jussi, you have half a minute for what is your take on the future of Africa?
Half a minute, perhaps just a minor correction that Uganda has never been a long-term partner country for Finland. We don't have an embassy, and education hasn't been a big part of cooperation there. I feel a bit reluctant to respond to the question because I see Africa as a huge continent with very different countries, very different contexts, and I could group our relation in perhaps four. One is the very fragile contexts, like Somalia, for instance, where we definitely see a role for us. We see a role for humanitarian and development funding. We have our perhaps more traditional partners for development cooperation, like for instance Mozambique or Tanzania, where there's still a big role for development cooperation, but we are broadening our relations to cover more focus on political and trade-related cooperation. Then we have some very interesting countries. One example, perhaps Kenya, where there's a lot of interest, many companies, a lot of cultural relations, all sorts of. We have a lot of potential to perhaps move away gradually from traditional development cooperation. And then we have dozens of countries where we have very, very little contact at all on the continent. No development cooperation, no cultural relations, very little political. So it's a big continent.
Thank you so much for our panelists. And unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I don't think we have any questions time now, but I'm sure that all Jussi, Elina and Ina will be happy to respond to questions after the closing words. Thank you. So Annika and Juha Ketalainen, but let's give applause.